Hi folks, did you miss me? It's time for another Movies by Month, and this time we're going to be going through the movies that I watched during the month of July. And obviously if you've been following the channel, you know that things have been a wee bitty quiet because I took the month of August off for a rest. But no worries, things are going to be returning to a bit of a semblance of normality soon enough. And interestingly, as opposed to last month where I watched a fair bit of TV, in July I really packed in the films, so strap yourself in, grab yourself a drink and a snack, and let's just get going. I'll wait. When I say I'll wait, I mean this is a good time to pause the video if you want to make a cup of tea. So yeah, anyway, on with the show. And the first film I saw in July was actually quite spectacular in a lot of different ways. That was the Netflix original movie, The Last Days of American Crime. And when I say it was spectacular, I really mean it, because it was one of the most spectacularly awful films I've ever seen in my entire life. Like so many recent action films, it's based on a comic book, and you can kind of tell because the story barely holds together with any kind of logic in any sense. But anyway, the plot is, it's set in a future where the US government has invented some kind of special radio signal that they can transmit, and somehow that makes you unable to do crimes. You just freeze in place when you try and do them. And luckily our hero, Graham Brick, seriously, Graham Brick. He gets hired by this weird little laddie and his not particularly faithful girlfriend to rob a bank vault, and they're going to do a bunch of clever things that are going to mean that they've got 15 minutes extra after the signal goes with which they can actually get over the border into Canada and escape. And the whole film is absolute rubbish. The actors look bored most of the time, the action's really messy, the editing is choppy as hell, the plot's just contrived and stupid, and what's worse, it's 2.5 hours long, so you really feel every minute and you're watching it for absolute ages. And I don't know what I should have expected, considering this director is really only known for the really awful action movie Columbiana and the 2 bad Taken sequels and one of the Transporter films, the ones with Jason Statham. So seriously, save yourself a few hundred minutes and a lot of brain cells and completely avoid this film. 1 out of 5. One of the worst films I've seen this year. One of the worst films I've probably seen ever. Avoid it like it's the COVID-19. But to cleanse the palate a little bit, the next film I saw was completely different, and that was The Vast of Night. And that's a quirky sci-fi drama set in a wee American town in the 1950s. And it was during the night of a big basketball game where the whole town's going to be down cheering them on in the local gym. And the story follows young Faye and Everett, and they're respectively the switchboard operator in the town and the local DJ. And during this quiet summer night, the pair of them start getting interference on the airwaves and on the phone lines. And people start calling in to tell them stories about what they think might be going on. And I don't really want to ruin the mystery here, because this is a film that's absolutely all about atmosphere and discovery, and a huge amount of it is listening to people tell spooky stories over the phone, or the pair of them rushing around to people's houses, or back and forward from the DJ booth to the switchboard house. And yeah, they're all trying to solve this mystery. And I'll tell you now, this is a 4 out of 5 movie. I mean, I'm totally confident recommendation. You should absolutely sit down and watch it. But if you do, stick with it through the first 10 minutes or so, because there's a lot of scene setting at the beginning at the basketball game, and I kind of assumed that was going to be really important because it introduces you to like 20 odd characters and it mentions tons of incidental things. But it's not actually important to the plot. It's just showing you the world that these people live in and giving you this warm, happy 1950s rural suburban community feel to it. So with that proviso, definitely check it out. This is absolutely one to see. Another film I watched in August was the old classic that somehow I never got around to seeing or reading the book or catching the play version of it, but that was Picnic at Hanging Rock. Now, I actually always thought this was a true story, but apparently it's not. However, it is a fantastic film. This is the story of an Australian girls' school back in about 1900 who all go on a St. Valentine's Day picnic to a place called Hanging Rock, which is like an old extinct volcano in Victoria, Australia. And during the course of a very hot day, a few of the girls wander up the hill, and later on one of them comes running down in a fluster, so a teacher goes up to look for them, but the teacher never comes back, and they can't find the girls either. And that's the central mystery of the whole story. What's going on? Where did these people vanish to? Has there been some kind of foul play? And if so, who's been involved? I mean, have they been murdered? And if so, by who? Was it the carriage man, or this rich boy, or like his manservant, or another passerby, or someone? And how is it going to affect the school and the teachers back there and the local community? And considering this is based on a book from the 60s and the film came out in 1975, it's likely that people will know this story. I mean, I'm sure a few of you actually know it, but it came as a complete surprise to me because I had it in my head that this was like an Agatha Christie style mystery, like a whodunit or something, but instead it's this kind of strange, dreamy film with a sort of a weird, warped quality, and it feels like it's been made with a kind of, like, to give you the sense that almost like you're getting heat stroke while you're watching the film. And it has this sort of unreal quality to it, even down to the way the voices are being redubbed and like the scorching Australian summer heat beating down over everything. And I'm actually quite curious to seek out the book for this one and read it now, since I'm pretty intrigued. But as for the film, it's an absolute 5 out of 5 for me, definitely. And I've heard that there was a fairly recent TV adaptation of it with Natalie Dormer from Game of Thrones in one of the lead parts. So at some point I might actually check that down for review later on down the line. Next up was a pretty interesting wee thriller I saw that had a bit of a supernatural leaning to it, and that was Fallen. Now Fallen's an early 90s film with Denzel Washington as a detective on the hunt for a serial killer. But as you find out from pretty much the start of the film, the serial killer is actually a kind of demon who can possess pretty much anyone it touches, and it can jump from body to body. So basically this film's a bit like somebody took the plot of the film Seven and had them hunting down the crazy serial killer, but then put Pazuzu from The Exorcist into it. And it's surprisingly good fun. And Denzel's doing his classic Denzel stuff, and it turns out this is actually the movie where we get the famous Relieved Denzel meme that's been all over the internet for a while. So yeah, this was a decent one. It was a lot of good fun. It's a solid 3 out of 5. I mean, it's got some silly points. There was some plot bits that didn't really work for me. And some of the procedural 90s cop drama stuff is a bit cheesy feeling. But there's loads of familiar faces, and actually the acting's not bad. And it was kind of fun. So yeah, pretty good fun all round. Another film that tries the demonic thing and really isn't that much fun was this absolutely terrible movie that I watched for a Bad Film Friday, and that was Rabid Grannies. No, really, Rabid Grannies. And you might guess that it's a trauma movie, and an awful lot of people are visiting this elderly relatives. They're like two old spinster millionaires, but then a witch comes and curses them when they're all having dinner, and the two old ladies turn into possessed demon cannibal mischief makers and start murdering everybody. And this film is bad. It's just plain bad. It looks and it sounds terrible. It was shot for about £1, and it makes absolutely no sense. It was also clearly all shot in a foreign language and then redubbed, and not a single character is actually likeable or interesting. So I'm not going to waste any more of your time in it or any of mine. Avoid. 1 out of 5. Absolute garbage. On a slightly better note was a semi-political thriller I saw this month called Closed Circuit. Now, this is actually a drama with Eric Bana, the actor most people probably know from either Hector in the movie Troy or as the husband in The Time Traveller's Wife. And he plays Martin, who's like a high-end lawyer. And he takes on the case as a defence advocate for this terrorist in a high-profile law trial. And he's alongside a special advocate, Claudia, played by Rebecca Hall, who viewers of the channel will recognise as one of the leads in the TV show Tales from the Loop. And the whole thing revolves around how there's loads of these major issues being brought up by the tension between Martin and Claudia, because it turns out they had an affair a couple of years back, and that's the main reason that he's actually having a messy divorce with his wife. But also, because some of the evidence in the case is top secret MI5 stuff, it means it has to be held behind closed doors and like secret. But because Martin can't stop digging, he's putting himself and Claudia in danger from the terrorists, but also from MI5, also from the local government. And also, because of this as a drama, there's all kinds of conspiracy stuff and secrets and lies. And most of it is pretty interesting, if sometimes a wee bit flat. It's kind of a 2 out of 5, to be honest. It's not a bad film, but it's kind of a slow and predictable film. And everyone in it is just a little bit too dim in the things that they say for the high-power jobs they're supposed to have, which suggests that it's either written by someone who isn't that clever, or it's been aimed very specifically at an audience that they think probably wouldn't understand a lot of the legal stuff and a lot of the technical stuff that's going on, which begs the question of why they would be watching it in the first place anyway, because yeah, it's a strange movie in that way. But it's not terrible, and there's really good performances from all the leads, and it's chock full of solid acting talent. And folk like Riz Ahmed, Jim Broadbent, Kieran Hines, they all turn up. I mean, it's one for a rainy night when you don't feel like watching something too big and thinky or too crash bang wallet, but a little bit highbrow. So yeah, check it out. Now, in an interesting turn, in July, I decided to take up a 7-day free trial of a TV channel called Shudder, which is like a horror movie channel. And I kind of like horror movies. And I'm not promoting it here, I'm just letting you know that it exists, because the next bunch of films that I watched were all off that channel. So bear that in mind for the rest of the video. Now, the first thing I watched was a thing called Blood Machines. And that was kind of a weird 3-part show that I found on that channel. And it apparently started out originally as a single film, since every episode was only about 20 minutes long or less. And it was about some kind of space junkers who are out to try and salvage a ship that they've shot down. But when they do, they meet up with like these women with red paint in their hair, and they make the ship give birth to a space lady. And none of this makes any sense, and it's a kind of weird trippy 80s nonsense that leans really into a load of old like sci-fi cliches. And it feels kind of like some kind of drugged out fan's homage to the old 90s cheapest chips sci-fi show Lex the Dark Zone. Do you remember that? That was kind of a funny show. But yeah, it's a bit like that, only less fun, but definitely shot and with a little bit more budget. And apparently it's a sequel to a music video for a song called Turbo Killer. But other than the visual style of that video, and like some of the repeated motifs and stuff, and the choice of the soundtrack, doesn't seem like the story's that related. I mean, that was all cars and long coats and stuff, and the only thing that really carries over is a couple of shots of a spaceship and a woman with an upside down cross sort of glowing out of her forehead. Anyway, 2 out of 5 for this, for the visuals alone, because, I mean, to be honest, it's really well done, the CGI and everything, and the way it's made to look like it was a scratchy old grindhouse film, like shot on cheap and nasty film in the 70s. I mean, that was really well done, but absolutely everything else, from the writing to the acting to the plot logic, was pretty dire. So yeah, this is one I would definitely say, don't waste your time on it unless this is like a very particular thing that you've got a huge interest in one of these aspects. An actual proper film that I saw on the channel was this recent horror movie, The Witch in the Window. And that's a modestly budgeted indie horror drama, and it was all about a guy taking his 12-year-old troubled son out to the countryside over the summer to help renovate a house that he's flipping.
I'm flipping it.
Now, as soon as they're out there, we start seeing a mysterious woman appearing all over the house and the grounds, but the boy and the dad seem completely oblivious to her, until that is a neighbour tells them about the story of the spooky old witch that used to live in the house and used to peer out of the window, and weird things that happened there even after she died. And it's a really interesting film because in the era of like the Insidious movies and the Conjuring and the Nun and all those kind of quiet bang jump scare horror films, it's nice to see a film that actually has a human story to tell. And it's much less about the witch, at least for the majority of the film, and much more about this divorcee dad trying to connect with his son and be a good dad and have this wonderful home he's trying to make. And the boy trying to understand that things don't always just fix themselves in life. Sometimes you have to work for it. And another interesting thing was that the actual witch in the movie was played by the same woman who played the mum in the infamous Stan music video by Eminem. I spent half the movie trying to work out where I recognised her face from, and this is it. So now you know, and you don't have to wonder if you watch the film. But yeah, it's a wee indie horror gem and very worth seeing. So I'll give it about 4 out of 5 and recommend that if you come across it, you sit down and watch it, because you probably will enjoy it. The next film up was a curious little film from Mexico. And that was one that has apparently done the rounds at a bunch of festivals last year, and I heard people mentioning it on podcasts and on YouTube videos and stuff, but that was one called Tigers Are Not Afraid. And this is a film about these kind of favela kids in Mexico and the runaways and orphan criminals who like hide out and live on the roofs and go around robbing houses. And the main character in the story is Estrella, and she's a wee lassie who comes back from a bad day at school where there was a shooting near the school, and she finds that her mum's vanished. And a few days later, this wee boy called Shine breaks into the house, and she ends up following him and becomes a sort of like Wendy to this gang of lost boys. And there's a very big Peter Pan allegory in the story, because like Shine stole this gun and mobile phone from Kako, a local gangster, and Kako's out for blood and the phone because of the incriminating videos saved on it. So the film all becomes about these kids growing into a found family while on the run from the gangsters. And they're all hiding out round abandoned buildings in Mexico, and at the same time Estrella keeps getting haunted by this kind of spooky version of her mother and this weird kind of graffiti made out of blood that sort of seems to keep following her around the city. And it's a kind of cool idea, and there's an obvious influence from stuff like the films of Guillermo del Toro, like films like Pan's Labyrinth and The Devil's Backbone. Although interestingly, it actually reminded me of a computer game I played back on the PlayStation 3 a few years back called Papo and Yo, which did a kind of similar thing, and it was a story of a boy's difficult relationship with his alcoholic, abusive father. And it sort of turned it into a story about a wee boy with a giant pet monster that can turn unexpectedly angry and violent. But yeah, Tigers Are Not Afraid, it's kind of an interesting one with a supernatural side to things and the childhood trauma, and it works well, but while Guillermo del Toro is kind of a master of this movie, it's just okay. I mean, it's a nice idea and it's pretty well done, but sometimes it feels a wee bit amateurish, like the director isn't quite comfortable or maybe didn't have quite enough plot to run through it. And the end result is a film that's good, but it's not amazing. So, I mean, yeah, it's 3 out of 5. Interesting, especially if you want to see some Mexican cinema, but yeah, I wouldn't rush out to try and find it. And while I had the Shudder channel, I also decided to watch the documentary series Cursed Films. And that's a 5-part documentary that they made that looks into the weird events and making of 5 films that had notoriously cursed productions. And some of these are kind of more silly than others, like how The Exorcist and The Omen had some spooky things going on, and like some crew died after the film, and lots of little things or accidents and stuff. But other events are more heavily tied into tragic events, like how Brandon Lee was like fatally injured on set when they were filming The Crow, or the really sad events around the death of the wee blonde girl on the Poltergeist films. And it's pretty interesting stuff. And it does go into an awful lot of random details about the filmmaking, like how the rumours were true about there being real skeletons used on Poltergeist as props, and you get insights from like all these kind of fascinating people that were involved in the films, and it goes really long ways into showing you what happened behind the scenes on some really old classic films. The downside of it, though, is it's all a little bit ghoulish, and especially the final episode, which was all about the Twilight Zone movie, where, if you don't know, famously an actor and 2 children died on set during a helicopter accident, and in the middle of this show, it just plays the footage and shows you it happening, and it's really quite upsetting, and there was not really any need for that. And I know that it's an 18 rated show, and there's swearing and stuff, and there's gore and scenes from the movies you're seeing, and everyone talking about it swearing and stuff because that they're just talking frankly about these things. But it shows that footage more than once, and it feels completely unnecessary. And I could have done without having seen that. So because of that, I'm only going to give it a 3 out of 5, and the recommendation that maybe you only watch the first 4 episodes and you skip the Twilight Zone one at the end. And to round things off nicely with something that's a little bit more cheerful, why don't I tell you about a show that I watched in July that I did enjoy? And that was season 1 of the HBO series Barry. And Barry is a show where Bill Hader plays an ex-US Marine who's turned his hand to being like a hitman to pay for like the bills and to get over the deep chasm of depression that's left in his life. And he's sent to kill a personal trainer in LA, and he hunts him down. Turns out this guy is at an acting class run by Henry Winkler, and Barry accidentally kind of gets roped into participating, only it turns out he really enjoys it, and he ends up joining the class, only for the Chechen mafia who hired him to actually go and kill the guy themselves, and then come after him, leading him into a kind of awkward situation. And the show's a brilliant mix of comedy and pathos, and you've got Barry's desperate attempts to try and live a normal life and connect with these aspiring young actors, and especially one of them, Sally, who has her eye on him. But at the same time, he's still got to throw off the Chechens and the police investigation into the murders that keep happening as a result and try and live his life. And it's a genuinely very, very funny show, and it's a wonderfully preserved dig into the lives of Hollywood wannabe actors and agents and acting coaches and all this kind of stuff. And every episode's only half an hour long, so it's a pretty easy watch. And I've got to be honest, I watched the entire first season in a whole night, just in one sitting, because it was that good. And so yeah, that was my July. And those are the films and things that I watched during it. So hopefully there's some stuff in there that you found interesting, and I might have given you some warnings about what to steer well clear of. So in the meantime, do remember you can follow me on Twitter at Grumpy Opinions and chat to me there. You can join the Facebook group Grumpy Opinion. And if you're feeling generous, sign up to my Patreon, although it's currently on hiatus at the moment because I managed to mess up turning it off for August. But anyway, don't worry about that. It's not going to make any difference if you sign up. It'll sort itself out. But otherwise, until next time, I've been Ian, and these have been my Grumpy Opinions. And a special thanks to everybody listening, and especially my patrons, and most especially to Michelle Forbes and Judith Coloma, my top tier patrons. Thank you everybody. Everybody stay safe. Cheerio.